All right, everybody, welcome to Lemurstream 55. We're returning to our discussion of interaction ritual chains by Randall Collins. I'm joined, as always, by John Hampson. How are you doing, John?
Pretty well, pretty well. How about yourself?
Oh, I'm at my usual equilibrium, so it's all good.
We keep on sipping.
That's the one. It is okay to sip. I want everybody to know that. There's no shame in taking small sips. All right. Well, hopefully everybody can hear us if they're. I doubt we have any viewers yet, but I'll keep an eye on the chat. Anyway, it looks like this section of the book is him giving a more detailed overview of some of Goffman's work, and that begins on page 19 for me. So, do you have any introductory comments on that, John, while I see if I can fire up my screen sharing?
Yeah, this is sort of a continuation from last time where he opened up Goffman's ideas of, like the hellos and the goodnight kiss and several of, I guess, what would be considered positive micro rituals that sort of, common things that bind people together. And this section kind of goes over some of the negative aspects, or things that may fail to create that emotional connection and persist that chain. So a little bit on the downside as far as happiness, but I think it's important to go over this as well, just to kind of see what the breakdown is.
Yes, it seems like his organizing concepts in these first couple of paragraphs are deference and demeanor.
Mm-hmm. So they're like modifiers on, maybe a ritual is identical to something that would be a good connective event, except, there are some points of failure, maybe some disingenuous aspects that cause it to represent itself negatively and maybe even drain that emotional energy.
Mm-hmm. Yes, so he says that Goffman gives a taxonomy of ritual elements. So this would include things like politeness to others, and this is a form of deference, which in turn divides into presentation rituals and avoidance rituals. So you make certain presentations to show that you're respecting somebody else's or some other group's private matters or matters of integrity, I suppose, and you also observe some taboos in the way that you interact to achieve the same end.
Yeah, and there's no real ability to not do something. It's almost as if something's going to be done, it either has a positive or a negative impact, and maybe even the lack of an introduction or something of that nature would be considered negative as well, where it was normally expected. So, like in the last section, he talked about the basic hello and goodbye and these things that don't seem too important, maybe even not unconscious in a way, but they're there to be the glue for these socially binding persons or groups.
Yes. Yes. So the rest of this first paragraph is him just talking about the nature of respect for privacy as an element of this deference. So, key to deference is being aware of and stepping around the private matters in life of other people.
Oh yeah, it's even more important today with the lack of privacy going into the digital age. Everybody's on watch all the time, so I find it kind of nice when people can respect others' boundaries, and it seems to be a more important ritual to conduct today, knowing that everyone is sort of being spied on in such a sense.
Indeed. So there seems like there's a key sentence at the beginning of the next paragraph here where he explains how deference and demeanor relate to one another. It states, deference is what individuals do toward others. Demeanor is the other side of the interaction, the construction of a social self.
Yeah, there's another thing I wanted to add is with the emotional energy content of, either two persons or a group, by not giving them that space, you're actively draining their ability to kind of replace that emotional energy and introduce it into that group. So these things are just as important as the positive attributes because they allow people to be able to combine in various ways.
Yes, I recall in the intro or the preface, he mentioned that if people were excluded from an interaction ritual, they could become emotionally battered by that relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, you can't really form your own full conception of yourself without the work of others viewing you and kind of interacting with you to know, maybe your behavior needs to be altered in some way. So these are all necessary for micro interactions so that people can kind of
Mhm.
self-organize and to be able to understand who they are within a group, which it could be
Yes.
different from one group to another as well. So these are part of the codex of that particular relationship,
Mhm.
depending on who the individuals are.
So, according to Collins, Goffman makes an interesting amendment to something called to the symbolic interactionist line of thought. And this seems to relate to the idea of the self concept. So you posit this um, sense of social self in a situation, and you can view yourself from the perspective of the other. This is the first order level of analysis. But then Goffman comes along and says, well, actually, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Um, and this is in relationship to this idea of demeanor. In fact, what really happens is that uh, in the situation modulates what kind of social self you need. So it says here
Yeah,
the actor
that term
acquires
face work.
a face or social self in each particular situation. Yes, so you brought up this term, keyword face work. Yeah, go ahead with that thought, John.
I actually kind of thought of my idea of ocular reasoning here in that
Mm,
you have a a modifier where some potentially autisms or other lack of ability to see these micro expressions could alter that relationship in some way. And so this face work seems to be important to be able to read somebody and accurately kind of pick up on the small demeanor and these tonalities that are really kind of subtle. So it's something you can't really escape living in a three-dimensional world with other living beings. So it's really just the front lines of where rituals kind of take place and social dynamics can, I guess, draw from.
mhm. So
It
according,
says it's not one-sided action, but it's reciprocal. So it's like a constantly going chain.
yes, and the social self is an idealized one, and that idealization derives from the demands of the situation. An interesting concluding thought in this paragraph. He says, for Goffman, there is no privileged reality standing outside of situations, but only a chain of situations and preparation for and aftermath of situations.
Yep, there's no escape. So you might as well make it positive. If you're going to have interactions with people, might as well be somewhat positive. But also, I guess there might be some ways he includes here of ways to uh, conveniently separate or put up a boundary from the interaction chains that you don't want to be a part of. Perhaps like, drug abusers or other violators. Maybe there's some ways to kind of differentiate yourself from these people.
Right. Yes. So a way to understand it, perhaps by the way of, I don't know, like a physical analogy, like suppose you had a group of people moving some heavy object like furniture, you could say that the effort each is putting into the furniture, which represents the situation analogously, is face work or demeanor. And let's suppose you had somebody who wasn't taking his fair share of the weight. That would be somebody who wasn't putting much of an effort into his demeanor, his situational self concept that supports the overall interaction ritual, in this case, the moving of the furniture by analogy.
Yeah, that's a really good one because there's a lot of, trying to fit a piece of furniture through a door. You might have to make many micro adjustments, and that requires the everyone to be participating.
Yeah. And sometimes I've often observed this in a group where there's, I don't know, 4 or 5 people hanging out, and you have somebody who's a bit standoffish, and you'll often see the more socially adroit members of that group will try and encourage him to become more engaged, not just out of, I don't know, sympathy, but because they realize he's a drag on the energy and that they need to get him inspired and brought into the intersubjectivity of the situation.
Definitely.
All right, so I think we've mastered what deference and demeanor are. So what's he moving on to next? I've just got to try and move this Adobe page.
Yeah, I like this because I get to use ocular reasoning and a little bit of Deleuze posting. So it looks like Goffman continued his research in another bit of field work he did, specifically with schizophrenics in the hospital, mental hospital ward. So in doing so, he kind of, like Deleuze does later on, indicates that what's really going on with the schizophrenic is that they're unable to make these, in Deleuze's terms, desire production machines, these connective processes. In Goffman's terms, it's more ritual incompletion. So people that are unable to sort of do the back and forth with micro interactions, they're considered a schizophreniform or some other, because something is broken or maladaptive for them to be able to bind themselves in social circumstances. And so I guess this is where he kind of got his insight for what are the lines of how important it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point.
And so, I mean, if you just like whip out your penis and start masturbating in a public space, you haven't mastered the social ritual systems quite yet. In fact, whatever you are bringing into the situation is negatively impacting the people that are in it. So,
well, C.K. Louis would disagree. Okay, so according to Collins, Goffman carried out a lot of research on these kind of abnormal types, precisely so that he could contrast that with what supported or worked toward having normative interaction rituals.
Mm-hmm. So are you just on the next page? Is this 20 for you?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. Yep.
Yeah, so that seems pretty self-explanatory.
Here's another connection, though, and this is something that also is elucidated in Deleuze's work too. That these mental patients, it's not always just that they're the ones that are introducing these negative behaviors or violating, but as part of it, whether it's because they're in a mental institution or because some other factor is wrong, like maybe people being bullied or something, because of their state in the larger group, they're being deprived of this privacy or other means of self-actualization that can create a negative cycle. And so, you even have people in the world like Michael Avenatti, the creepy porn lawyer. I mean, he's got to fight uphill in order to make his message get across, because he's made so many negative statements and interactions before, but also people are weighing down on him for
Mm-hmm.
the way that he's being. So it's
Yeah.
just it's a feedback loop that's very important to understand and know how to manipulate, which he goes into a little bit further here.
Yeah, so Goffman didn't just look at people who are unable to engage in normative interaction rituals. He also looked at where they failed. So where one makes a bloop or a blunder, in his term, of carrying out an effective interaction ritual. You'll recall from the preface that he specifically noted that when an interaction ritual fails or is weak, it actually depletes the emotional energy of the participants.
Yeah, he also starts off here talking about it may not be that it's whether it's an autism or some other type of illness, but maybe it's self-directed. As he says, sophisticated deviance. So these are sort of the laws that bind social situations, and they must be followed. And a lot of it's implicit, or as people will say, unwritten law. But here he kind of goes through and explains what are the major types.
Yeah. So part of a sentence worth repeating here. He says that Goffman showed that the ordinary reality of everyday life is not automatic, but is constructed by finely honed interactional work.
Yeah, and it's pretty interesting. And it was a little bit negative, I thought, when I first read it, but it could be a matter of spoofing these interactions to create, be able to grift somebody into a situation that they normally wouldn't be accepted into. You could wear an insignia of some group and maybe pass off as a member and sort of cheat that system that you'd normally have to participate in to get the acceptance. So kind of creepy, but it's also something that it's kind of fragile. So we rely on things that are somewhat overt, and it could be spoofed, but maybe that's important to kind of have an understanding of that, so that you can avoid being manipulated by somebody who's able to bypass a few basic features.
Yes, I like some of these terms, the vulnerabilities of situations, picking up on details of the structure of normalcy. I mean, these are all vital matters for us when we're conducting ourselves in day-to-day situations as really normative subalterns. All right, let us see. Yes, so he's interested in the mechanism that produces the normal. So this is why Goffman is interested once again in schizophrenics and mental patients, and then later on spies and espionage and agents, as he's talking about here, because you'll see them trip up and suddenly you start to see the stage that they're acting upon. Like it's everybody has to buy in to the situational reality to make it real, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And now, why do people do this? He explains here, life follows routine rituals for the most part because it's the easiest thing to do and full of difficulties if one tries to do something else.
Yeah, and this is sort of what makes it important, is that, like I said at the beginning, something has to be done. You can't be a catatonic and just sit there and find your way in different situations. You have to do something or another. There's no nothing. So you can't avoid this type of study.
Yes. All right, so the next thing that Collins reviews in Goffman's work is his alleged Machiavellian view of life, this idea that there's always kind of duplicitous self-presentation, which is very elastic, which is instrumentalized by the real self, I'm guessing, to maximize one's advantage in a given situation. This is discussed in the presentation of self, apparently. And Collins goes on to balance this out with another side of Goffman, which was the functionalist influence from Durkheim. Did you have any explanation on that, John?
Specifically with what?
Well, just how the two relate to each other within Goffman, like these two distinct influences.
I guess I kind of just lost track of where you were putting that. You talking about with what he said here, or something outside of this narrative?
Well, just the two currents that are informing how Goffman is conceiving of social situations.
Okay, both positive and negative. Well, I mean,
Machiavellian and Durkheimian, so it's functionalist and self-interested, I guess.
Well, I mean, the more, I guess this is an effect of the rise of psychology. In Durkheim's age, there wasn't really, the Freudian common knowledge about how people interacted. So I think you'd probably have less instances of people being intentionally negative and Machiavellian, maybe in the upper classes and in the very lower classes. But as you have more people aware of these things, I think lots of people modify their behavior. If you want to be a part of a group, all you have to do is put on the suit, sort of. So I think a majority of modern people act this way, and that they can modify their behavior to kind of put themselves where they want to be. But I'm not so sure that that's justified by nature, or is that going to actually benefit people in terms of how it relates to our study, and I guess the 3.0 ideas. It's almost invariable today that the institutions that are causing the most harm, like he says here, like salespeople who trick others and just avoid actually doing what they're supposed to do, but make it look like they're busy. This is kind of what drains our overall society, is these little interactions that add up. I mean, everyone seems to have a job that they hate, but they kind of put on a fake smile. And, we need to advocate for people actually finding the places, being part of the groups that they want to be in, so that these interaction rituals and these chains that develop are actually a positive momentum, and it protects the members rather than creating such a need for security and other things like that. I would think that once you get to a certain position, it should escalate so that the pressure to do the right thing becomes more positive than the avoidance of the negatives and things like that.
Yeah. It looks like the synthesis is this: once you've determined the dynamics or the chains of interaction that modulate a situation or a point of contact, only then can you exploit them. So he says, Collins says, any individual maneuvering for advantage must build upon it. Self-interested action is successful only as it respects ritual constraints. Manipulation is possible precisely because ordinary life is an endless succession of situations that have to be acted out to be defined as social realities, and that constrain both actor and audience to take part in the work of keeping up the impression of reality.
That's interesting too, and he brings in the audience. So even people that are not part of a particular group, but those that are outside and observing it, optics or other perception layers are.
But they are part of the situation because if the actors within the situation are aware of them, right?
Right, they'd have to be aware. So, maybe you get on a pedestal and make a statement about something, but maybe you're just forming a group and you're over in your own place, and then a reporter decides to, get into that space and send your message to other people unintentionally from your behalf.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I guess it's at the case that you should kind of expect to be connected to all other situations regardless, and just prepare.
So Goffman extends this conversation into what makes possible what it is that makes possible the domination of a situation, working from Goffman's perspective. And I mean, this is very interesting stuff. So basically, what you have to do is you have to find a way of suppressing the other person or making them lose face, but without disrupting the ritual, which is the dynamic intersubjectivity of the situation. So you can't step outside certain parameters. You have to find a way of pushing somebody down within those parameters.
Yeah, you're looking at the section on insulting, and
Yes,
I guess
yes.
that would. Yeah, it's pretty tricky because it's one of those things that's probably really difficult for most people to put down in words. Although I think everyone knows how to insult another person, but if you kind of put it in the frame of what we're discussing, an insult really derives from the situation specifically, and those persons that are a part of it, and their history, and maybe most understood by those individuals, but still at the same time recognized by outsiders. You hear
Mm.
somebody insulting another, and based on the context, that can actually give you a lot of insight into what that relationship contains and where it's
Yeah.
at, things like that.
Yes, he says situational prestige goes to the person who does this, puts somebody else down by keeping to the normal forms of ritual interaction. So you want to use double meanings, things which I guess allow for two interpretations. One that does the actual work of attacking your opponent, and the other which conforms to the flow of the interaction. There's a famous line, I think it's from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, where is it Mark Antony says, Brutus is an honorable man.
Hmm.
And
Right.
even just the modulation on honorable, which is clearly implied for the actor from the text, allows you to see that what is being delivered there is really a scathing insult, but it's one that conforms to the, um, I don't know, tradition of respect or whatever.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up, and I think a lot of people probably have never seen that play acted out with actors, but it's kind of interesting how a lot of these things can be communicated through text, but that in Goffman's explanation, he uses the word FaceTime, and how
Yes.
integrated that actual visual relationship occurs versus the textual. And a lot of people would tell you that it's kind of hard to understand another person through text. You may not know that they're joking or something. So it seems like that face work is very important. Although it's kind of interesting, it still can be communicated through text in some way.
Yeah. Yeah, so it seems one of the ways that um, the dominance can be achieved is where you throw the ball to somebody and they fail to pick up on it. Just 1 second, just keep going for me, John. I just have to
Okay.
attend to something. Yeah, I'll be right back.
Uh, there's a final paragraph here where he says Goffman's model of conflict is individual advantage coming from manipulating the normal rituals of solidarity, deference, and situational propriety. And the
All right, I'm
individual, although
back.
self-interested, is nevertheless interested in what can be found only in the social situations. So that individuality and egotism are oriented towards socially constructed goals. So maybe rather than a particular group, maybe somebody would be taking energy from a smaller group and trying to place it on their own social identity or another group's identity. So you also see commonly, intergroup scuffles, where one group criticizes another group, even though they're not particularly individuals. It may be that they're criticizing the rituals that these other people conduct or the energy that resonates from that group. So
Oh, I see.
there's
You're
definitely
looking.
self-interest, but it goes to many different spheres. Um, but these things are still true, even though they can be elevated to larger spheres of individuals.
Am I coming through?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you've gone on to that next paragraph. I don't know if I got to that, but it looked like his concluding thought. He summed it up quite nicely here in the last paragraph. Is that the reason why individuals, even if they're self-interested, will conform to social situations is that they're trying to get goods which are an emergent property of those social situations. So this is why it's inevitable that social realities will form even if you have purely selfish motives.
I'm surprised he hasn't used the word magic at all or addressed that aspect, because like you said, it is emergent. And where does that 1 + 1 = 3 here, where does that extra piece come from, except through the combination of these individuals and their interactions?
Yeah.
It's like a third component that seems to be baked in through the life experience.
Mm. All right. Well, I think we're more or less at the end of our section for this week. I'll turn off the screen sharing and quickly check the chat, see what's going on here. Looks like we have Jonathan Poll is here. Hello, Jonathan. HIV transgender. Wow, chat's exploded today. Hi, Eke. Eke's here too.
Mark C.
Okay, it doesn't look. Hang on. HIV positive says, I often employ Machiavellian tactics when interacting with difficult people / my enemies or potential enemies. Yeah, everybody does it, consciously or not.
See, it seems like what our gambit is here is quickly understanding the social reality that we are in the midst of, and also understanding the tools to be able to re-engineer our own. And so, in the last discussion of the content we just read, maybe there are some ways where we could, effectively insult the negative uh, interaction chains that are happening and somewhat steal some of that emotional energy for our own, or siphon some of the energy that's already present in the larger sphere.
Yeah, yeah. TK says, hey, the lemur is back online. Well, I never left. It was just that we missed 1 week, I think, when we generally stream. At the moment, we're really just keeping one fire alight, but it's possible my streaming could tick up as some of the other people who come on here reconstitute themselves. It just depends on that. Okay, well, it looks like we've addressed everything there. So,
Yeah, next week's going to be a little bit more jam packed and content full. So you guys will want to check that one out. It's probably a lot more useful elements.
yeah, we'll be back this time next week. HOV says it feels like the Lemurstream has been gone for months. Well, it's probably because at one point I was streaming almost every night after Eke, but of late we've, I and other people like Hampson here have been putting more emphasis on more focused streams, and that requires a degree of preparation and reading, that kind of stuff. So I guess we've switched out quantity for quality.
We still looking at doing some other discussions on other authors. I think you'd mentioned. Is that in the works, or?
I'm not sure if we'll do them on stream. We'll have to see. I really don't
Okay.
know at this stage. Yeah. All right. Well, I think that just about does us for today. So I will catch you guys next week, and thanks for tuning in.
Sip slow and carry on, folks.